welcome. Thank you all for joining us on Facebook Live, wherever you are around the corner and around the world. And in this conversation and exploration that we're going to be having, we want you guys to be active participants. So please share comments, thoughts, questions in the comment section, and we're going to do our best to engage with them throughout the conversation, and most notably at the end, we'll be doing our best. So what is this and why is this that we're here? We're in the midst of what we're calling a Movement Health Equity Series. This is round 2. We're so glad to be with the wonderful Dr. Rupal Patel. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Patel.
Thank you for having me.
We did round 1 2 weeks ago with Dr. Lisa Van Hoos, and that was absolutely amazing. It was fun, fulfilling, and we learned much alongside Lisa and from Lisa. Some of the macro things that we talked about in that conversation, which will also find itself in this conversation as well. We talked about the role of movement and equity in health outcomes. We talked about expanding to thinking about the whole person healthcare to address social and racial trauma. And we talked about advocating policies and structures that provide equitable access to physical activity in communities. And that conversation with Dr. Lisa Van Hoos could be found on our Facebook page, Move Together, and then our Instagram page, Move Together. So the way we're thinking about the space that we're sharing together, a conversation 2 weeks ago with Lisa, and right now with Dr. Rupal Patel, and the conversations to come, not just a conversation, it's an exploration, and to bring a certain sense of humility to it, as well as aspiration. So together, the way we want to think about this, through the comments that you guys share and the conversation that we have, exploration, explore, movement and rehab medicine is how its essence might manifest itself in its fullest form in the lives of individuals and in the fabric of communities. In the lives of individuals and in the fabric of communities, that macro to micro, that micro to macro. And to get there, of course, we're going to be looking to identify some of the barriers to get to that fully manifested form, which will be our intent to do, and how we might transcend them. So, who are we? I'm going to share a little bit about myself, and then I'll give the baton to Dr. Rupal Patel. My name is Efosa Guobadia. I have the high pleasure of leading the organization with an amazing team, Move Together. And our organization's mission is to increase access to quality rehab medicine around the corner and around the world with access, right? That salient word, access, being the keystone structure to all of it. And we have a vision of a clinic in every community and a sense of community in every clinic. A clinic in every community speaks to the horizontality and the breadth of where we hope to go with our mission. And community in every clinic speaks to the punctuation and the verticality of the things that we do and the places that we do go. And the essence of our organization is the belief and the remembrance of the transformative power of movement, the transformative power of movement, and what movement might mean in the life, again, of the individual as well as the collective. So anything that we do and that we've been able to be a part of is only possible with our whole team. So we're so very grateful to our whole team on Move Together. To talk about some things coming down the pike, we have a project coming down the pike called PT Day of Service, and that's on October 10th, 2020. That's a worldwide global initiative, and where we ask people to serve as responsibly as they can in the communities and neighborhoods that they're in, right in their backyard. And then we have a US-based initiative called Pro Bono Incubator, in which we collaborate with servant leaders and participants in communities around the US to provide resources, mentorships, and funds to bring care, notably to the uninsured and the underinsured. So, Dr. Patel, please tell us where are you, how are you, and what's some of the fun things that you're working on. It's been a high pleasure getting to know you and work with you over the last couple of years, and the passion that you bring to everything that you do, and the conversations that we had in Guatemala and conversations that we've had in the United States.
Well, thank you, Efosa. I'm honored to share this space with you and your amazing team, and always been an admirer of all of the great things you've been doing throughout your career. And yeah, I think the last time we talked and saw each other in person was in Guatemala when I was there in May of 2019 with students. And I think you had just gotten down there and you met us in Antigua, and we shared, what was it, we were in a hotel a rooftop bar, right? We talked about all these lovely things. So it's great to do this with technology. And so my full-time job is that I am a faculty member in the School of Physical Therapy at Texas Women's University on our Houston campus. and I've been on faculty. I think this is my 24th year. And over the years, I mean, my first love has always been neurologic rehabilitation and brain injury and stroke patients, also vestibular and balance and concussion. So that's kind of clinical home. And then when I was looking for PhD, opportunities, the whole promoting health and preventing things like brain injuries and strokes and concussions and falls was a big part of like what I was about. Like, why aren't we doing things in that realm? And so that led me to a PhD in health promotion and wellness from Rocky Mountain University. And that really helped me flip my switch in my head from being a physical therapist to being a health promoter who's a physical therapist who is there to kind of think about movement and health equity and how we make our society, better in terms of health. And so that's where I'm coming from in this conversation. And that's kind of, a little bit about myself.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Rupal, and sending you and your colleagues my best down in Texas, TWU. So before we dive in, I want us to go macro to micro, and we would be remiss to not speak to the times that we're in, so in this time of COVID-19, where we're learning new things every day, and we're sometimes unlearning old things, to try to walk that narrow path. And the world has been and is in a state of vulnerability right now. So I want to first of all wish everybody our best wherever you are, again, around the corner and around the world. And it's times like this in which social networks and communities are very important, whether it's professional communities and actual location communities and things of that nature. So sending everyone our best. The other thing I want to touch on, and which is very relevant in a conversation like this, is the concept of social dynamics, which is also very present and relevant in our times today. We've seen on variegated and multifrontal divisions that have been rising up around the corner and around the world, on the fronts of race, the fronts of economic brackets, and the fronts of political affiliations, and much more. And we get the sense that so many are feeling a sense of pain, so many are filled with cynicism, so many are filled with doubt and confusion, and some are even withdrawn. And yet there is many that are also with hope, and I think we're actually all with hope. So in some of these things that we're going to be talking about today, let us really go to that place of hope. We're going to be laying the landscape for some of the different barriers and things that could be better, but we can lean into those things with hope and the readiness for positive action. And in this place of a conversation, the only thing that we're promised is a chance and possibility. There's nothing else. So there's that old Machado quote that says, "Path maker, there is no path. You make your path by walking it." So in a conversation like this, and actions and conversations to come, let's walk towards a better world. So with that being said, Dr. Rupal Patel, I'm going to give you the baton to get us going. Our outline is going to be talking about movement, socio-ecological approach and models, and environmental design. Before we even dive into that,
I have to interrupt and say I love that quote, because some of my favorite things to think about is about journeys and paths. And that quote that you have there, and I just have to pull my favorite quote since I'm at my desk. It's actually by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it says, "Don't go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And I think we're in trailblazing times now with the opportunities we have. So I just wanted to piggyback on your quote with my own.
I love that so much. So I want to give you the chance to speak to the times and the environment that we're in, Dr. Patel, and then we'll lean into the outline. So the outline will be talking about movement, socio-ecological model for active living approach. We'll talk about environmental designs and things of that nature. But before we dive in, what's on your heart as we have this conversation, as we begin? What's on your mind? What's on your heart? Macro, micro, and anything in between?
Yeah, so I mean, I think from a macro level, just you've already kind of talked about it, with this pandemic. I mean, it seems like there's, we could say things that sound very cliche, but it is unprecedented times. It is times that have laid bare some of the inequities that have been happening in our society and in our country and across the world for a long time. And we've known about it, we've studied them in civics classes and social studies and whatnot in history, but now all of us around the world are living in it. A pandemic kind of brings the world together in a way, right? And so I think that that's always on the top of my mind, is like the times we're living in, and what I look for is always silver linings, because there's a lot of times you can, you know, read your news feeds and listen to the nightly news, and there's a lot of negativity and a lot of, you know, that out there. And I'm always one that pulls back from that and tries to look for the helpers, you know, as Mr. Rogers says, and that. And so I'm always looking for those positive things that are going on, and how I can lean into that to kind of grow that, you know, at a community level, and then down to the individual level. And I think with social dynamics, it's a, you know, it's a tough time right now in our country. I think for many people, it's a time of, you know, anguish and anger and hurt and frustration, and then that are living through some of the things and have lived through it for a long time. And especially when we talk about race and racism and inequities related to structures that are in place in terms of our society. But I think also for people that are allies or want to be allies, it's also a time of anguish and frustration or fear about saying the right thing, doing the right things. What's the best way that I can lean in, I can help? And so I think, you know, that is more of an issue right now, that the pandemic has just, to me, highlighted, or, you know, kind of made it more in the forefront.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So well said. As I shared this last couple of weeks ago with Lisa, and as is relevant here, talking about allies, as a mindset in which we come together and we move together to move forward, is that little Watson quote: "If you come here to help me, you're wasting your time. If you come because you realize that your destiny is bound up with mine, then let us work together." So within our profession of physical therapy, across the rehab landscape, and just as citizens within our country and even global citizens, what can we do for that better world? That's the salient question. Okay, so the Movement Health Equity Series. We're going to chat about that now, Rupal, and we're going to lay down the groundwork first with delineations and definitions before we dive into the socio-ecological. And we're going to start with the salient word of movement, and how we see it, you know, and what it means to us, and let those set up some of the poles that we engage with. So I'll start, and I'll give you the baton. We'll go back and forth here. We'll build upon a little bit of defining movement, how I see movement, the way our nonprofit organization talks about it. And movement is one of the oldest and closest commodities in our lives. It's with us from the very beginning and throughout. It really dictates how we engage with the world, how the world engages with us, how we run, how we play, how we dance, how we love, how we live. And there's true belief that when one is able to maximize their movement and their movement capacity, one is able to maximize their life. And then if I'm also pulling a little bit from the sharpening from and by and with Lisa last week, is this recognition that movement is also this expression. It starts, again, from the very beginning, you know, from the very, very beginning. And that expression comes to represent much of us, you know. So if that's limited in any way, if that's affected in any way, if that's inhibited in any way, a part of us is as well. So that's why the clearing of the barriers and the freeing of the terrain is so important. So that's my current take on movement there, Rupal. I'm going to pass you the baton.
All right, movement. So I thought about this, you know, it's like, you know, in your definition and how you define it for your organization, and how Move Together, what it is, you know, in terms of movement. So, you know, I had to go back. I love quotes too. And I took a course by Feldenkrais a long time ago, not by Feldenkrais, but on the Feldenkrais method, which was developed by Moshe Feldenkrais. And so a lot of is awareness through movement is what Feldenkrais is about. And so there's a quote by Feldenkrais that says, "Movement is life. Life is a process. Improve the quality of the process, and you improve the quality of life itself." Yeah? Movement is life. Life is a process. Improve the quality of the process, and you improve the quality of life. You know, and so becoming aware through movement, and how movement affects all aspects of your life. So that you know, that to me kind of captured and I had to go back and kind of look at notes from like 30 years ago, like, oh my God, there was something from Feldenkrais that I wanted to say. And so, I would say that, and, the other one, I've done Pilates courses early in my career, and Joseph Pilates also had like awesome things to say about movement. And there's a short quote of his where he says, change happens through movement and movement heals. And so to me, that is so profound, not just when we talk about physical movement, but we're talking about social movement. We're talking about health equity. Change happens through movement and movement heals, So there you go.
Powerful. Okay. I love that. I love that. I love that. Those I'm going to remember. As you know, I enjoy quotes as well, and those both pack punch in a very pithy and a powerful way. All right, so that's the landscape. Those are scientific and artistic way to look at this thing that we're saying is so important, and that we're saying that everybody should be able to have in their life in a free and fulfilling way, in a full way. So then that is a transition to this concept of equity, and what does that mean as we start to play what it all means together. And starting the baton again, simply stated for me is that is the removing of barriers, to that place that we all want to get to and to move to, so that there's this even and as much as possible fair landscape and equal opportunity for the potential that is within us. So that's how I see equity, and then we put it all together, right? Movement, health equity, get rid of the barriers so people could engage in the process and engage in life and be their fullest and freest self. And that's certainly sailing in the conversation that we're having, that we're about to dive deeper in. So as I pass you the baton back, Rupal, how would you describe and just delineate the idea of equity?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of times people, and honestly myself included before I dived into this, confuse equity with equality, and I think you said it well in terms of that fairness and justice aspect. And I think for physical therapists and PTAs and students, thinking of equality is giving everyone a pair of shoes so they can go and walk a mile. Okay. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that actually fit them. Okay. And so that's different than here's a pair of shoes and everybody pick one, take one, go walk, versus let's figure out what fits you best, And another example that I like that is visual that I use a lot is, if you were going to have a bike ride through the park, would you give the 5-year-old kid, the 25-year-old college graduate, the mom, the grandma, the person who has a mobility impairment and needs to use a wheelchair? Would you all give them the same bike and say, go do it? Because equality means give everybody a bike, let them ride through the park. But equity means making sure that the bike fits the person. So for the kid, you would make sure that it's appropriate for them. For the adult bike. For the older person, maybe, a tandem or something, person with disability, a hand cycle or something like that. So that's equity. Now you're giving them tools that fit them, and now you can say, go ride through the park or go do this race. And so those are, good ways for me to always think about as a physical therapist when I'm thinking about equity and what that means, in terms of our patients and clients and people that we help in our communities.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing. And if movement, health, equity, that all together was where it should be, we likely wouldn't be having this conversation. So what set this up is where are the pain points, and where are some of the opportunities? Because I think we could say there's an unevenness in the movement experience and the movement, health, equity terrain. The question is why. So Rupal, actually, what are some of the barriers? First, we'll break it down. What are some of the barriers to all folks having full access to full manifestation of a moving and active lifestyle? What are some of the barriers to that reality in individual lives?
Yeah, so I mean, audio is going in and out. So I think, barriers, again, we can look at it from macro to micro or vice versa, but, like at the micro level, individual level, I think the biggest barrier to movement for people is really self-efficacy. you know, because a lot of times, and especially when you think about people with health conditions, people with disabilities, or people that perhaps have been in environments, either physical or social, where movement is not something that everybody does out in public. Maybe there's safety issues. So that self-efficacy, can I do this? Should I do this? How is this gonna look if I'm doing this? You know, am I good enough? Those kind of things. And I think especially when it comes to planned exercise, because, you know, movement is physical activity, it's planned exercise, it's sport. There's a lot that goes into movement. And so, you know, I think a lot of times people think that movement is all about like a exercise or something really high level that you have to do and be good at and win at. And so the self-efficacy that no, movement is just about that, moving your body and in spaces and environments that make you feel good, make you feel happy, that, you know, promote that health from within. And so I think from that level, that's probably the biggest thing for me. And when I'm working with individuals, it's about improving their self-efficacy for movement so they can live a better life, you know. And I guess from the macro level, it's really about the physical and social environments that we live in, that we work in, that we pray in, that we go to school in, and are those set up to optimize movement of not just individuals, but also of the group of people, you know? And so, you know, a good example, and a lot of people that are already in that space of working with employers and physical therapists is, you know, you're looking at not just the patient with the back pain in your clinic, but now they're going back to their work setting on the factory line. And how is that environment going to set them up for optimizing their movement to be able to do their job, right? And so if the physical environment, the social environment, if the policy of that company is not set up so this person that you've just worked really hard to rehab is going to be successful going back to work and movement, then maybe not, right? And so I think from the macro level, kind of those things, and then the micro level, those things.
Going back to the macro level, when you talked about some of that self-efficacy, where is that, how are we seeing that break down in your clinical practice, community practice? Are there any cultural implications, exposure implications, personality implications? What may make one believe and understand, believe in movement, understand how to do it, understand that it should integrate in their life, and another one to not?
Yeah, so that's a deep dive just in itself, I think. And I would say that all of those things that you mentioned are important to consider when thinking about self-efficacy of movement. Certainly personal factors, contextual factors, you know, their social support, what is their family or cultural norm in the family in terms of movement or not. And, you know, I think as physical therapists, we have to be open to that and lean into that with our patients and clients and ask, you know, tell me how you view movement. What does movement mean to you? You know, if I said, you know, do you want to work on improving your movement or optimizing your movement? What does that mean to you? What does that look like for you and your life? And I think if we step into their space and understand movement from where they are, then we're going to be better at partnering with them to help them kind of get better with whatever it is they want to do. But if we have our own perception of what good movement or what this patient should be doing is, then that's our perception, our bias into their space, and that may not always be good to do, and we may not succeed, and we may create our own barrier by doing that. Does that make sense?
That's very much so. And for the rehab professionals and maybe even pinpoint a physical therapy professional, I'm thinking out loud, how have we been in this space? You know, movement is a lot of what we deal with. People come in, we're looking to restore movement, improve movement, and hopefully maintain and enhance it and empower people to enhance it. But how have we been in this state and having conversations about not just the sort of the impairment and functional limitation the person comes us to see, and a movement lifestyle? One of the interesting phenomenons in our life, things have progressed on movement and wellness and things of that nature. But this interesting phenomenon People work out intensely for 60 minutes for a workout during the day, and then they're sitting for the rest of the day. So how are we doing in this conversation for this active lifestyle, for this mobile lifestyle, empowering people to understand what things look like individually for them, and to know that you have to also be as intentional as you can at creating the environment that we want, or at the very least, is there opportunity, Rupal, to lean into that space more for our profession and rehab professionals?
Yeah, I love that thought, because if you think about just cultural differences in Western cultures and in Western societies where we do a lot of sitting, and unfortunately with this pandemic more so, versus in societies and some indigenous populations where movement is just what they do all day long. It's not a planned exercise, but that you walk and you're moving all day long. I think about the blue zones of the world, and Dan Buettner's work, and looking at places where there's people that are living to be 100 plus, a healthy 100 plus. And like one of the places I remember in his documentary he visited was Ikaria, which is an island in the Greek Isles. And it's one of those islands where there's lots of steps up and down. And so you see, that's how you get around, and you have a mule that carries stuff, but even then you're carrying things, you're moving, and you see people in their 80s and 90s continuing to do that because they've done that all their life. So their physical environment, their social environment, everything is set up to just move all day long. And it's culturally norm to move that way, whereas, I live in a fairly decent sized neighborhood, and I'm always one that, if we're going down the street to a neighbor's, which is about maybe a quarter mile or maybe a little bit more, I want to walk. But, sometimes my family's like, well, we have to carry this casserole, so let's take the car, because it's just convenient, and that's what we do. But it's like in other cultures and other places around the world, that's not, And so I think there's a big opportunity there for us to kind of learn and move throughout the day, and not just that 1 hour of plan. This is my exercise time. The rest of the time I can just be here and, do this.
I love that so much. So I'm in Guatemala, like we noted earlier, and there's a lot of mountains to hike here, and many people travel to hike these mountains and volcanoes. And you see some of tourists or people from out of the country going up these volcanoes, and it's a workout, And then you see these older folks who work them out and just carrying these heavy loads, just skipping up, just that their environment, and that not only their environment, the geography, how they set up their routine and the heuristics of their day. They're skipping up there like it's a stroll in the park, and other people up in their pumping. So those are things to certainly consider. So
looks like there's a comment. Kimberly Naro. Kimberly's one of my graduates, and I know she's on the Move Together team now. Hey, Kim. And she said it's important to distinguish equity from justice, where equity is the customization of tools to address inequalities. Justice is addressing the system itself. What do you think about that, Efosa?
I love that so much. Kim, teammate, thanks so much for sharing that. And I think we're going back and forth between macro and micro. The system, the overall system, cannot be ignored. There's a great quote by Dr. McNamara, that we could even unpack now. Let's wrestle with this quote right now.
Okay.
The quote goes, understanding the link between systemic trauma and health is imperative, because the conditions we treat may ultimately remain refractory in the absence of remedies to the structural traumas that underlie and perpetuate them. I'll say it one more time. Understanding the link between systemic trauma and health is imperative. Trauma is a multidimensional world, where because the conditions we treat may ultimately remain refractory in the absence of remedies to structural traumas that underlie and perpetuate them, by Dr. McNamara. So to Kimberly's point, the system is all important. There's a reminder that certainly the micro that we do affects the macro, but the macro, there's that great quote by Louis Pasteur that I think we talked about recently, Rupal, that I love. It goes that the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. The microbe is not actually nothing, but is talking about the importance of the terrain and the environment and the system, and that's the way it can really drive change. So let's wrestle with that thought. I think that's relevant in conversations like this.
Yeah, and the whole concept of systemic trauma, and as it relates to health and health equity, You know, there's a lot, especially in sociological literature, in even health behavior, and a lot of stuff on looking at adverse childhood experiences and how that can impact, you know, the person and their growth and development, and even things like safety and racism and the fears of, you know, being shot or killed or being profiled, and how that could limit your movement, right? In terms of like that kind of systemic trauma is going to make you fearful to go out and do things, and then that is going to lead to conditions and other things that is going to have an adverse effect on your life. And we know the huge disparities we have in health in terms of how certain minority populations, especially Black and Latinos in our country, are adversely affected because of systemic trauma. And so that you know, that to me is a huge aspect when we talk about movement health equity, is how do we minimize or dismantle, right? That's a new word we're hearing, or at least I'm hearing a lot. How do we dismantle those structures and systems that are perpetuating this systemic trauma and creating the health disparities we see, you know? And so, you know, some things I've read, and I don't have the exact article in front of me, but like, I think there was a study that looked at women that are, you know, in situations that they don't have good prenatal care, and then they're worried about providing good care for their infants. What if we gave them X amount of money? Like, and I think there's a TED talk on this that I saw, and maybe not an article, and then following them like prospectively over time. And then what does that, you know, X amount of money to have childcare do to the child's health and the maternal health over time, you know? And I think in that study that TED Talk was describing, I'll pull it up and send it to you as a reference, because I thought it was really good in talking about, you know, health equity and the systemic trauma and the impact it had. Like, you know, it wasn't big dollar amount, but the impact of it over time to this child and mother was huge, you know. And so that's just a small example, you know, in terms of investing in health and at the start of life, you know, and creating some systems in place that take away some of this systemic trauma, you know, that people have.
It's all about vectors, the things that we do and the things that we don't do. You know,
Yeah.
what if that cash to that family, that mother and daughter wasn't done? That's a different path, and it was done, that's a different path. And it's really this awareness, this intricate interrelation. A couple of weeks ago, I had a thought, an early morning thought, and it's a stark call out, you know, to each of us. If you're part of an unfair system, whether you're a beneficiary or not, if you're not actively working to dismantle or deconstruct that system, you're going to perpetuator of that same system. You know, and the aim for all of us should be that better world. And then to bring it back for why all this stuff matters, Maud Aubrey, you know, jogging in Atlanta not too long ago and shot. So to the point you're making, Rupal, that may place fear in the hearts of young men and women that look like him. So that fear may lead him to not go in certain neighborhoods or go in certain neighborhoods. That was his neighborhood to run, not running, not being active. That goes right to the back to the clinic. If you told your client to walk or to get a certain amount of steps, you know, and Lisa brought up such a great point. You could say you could walk that many steps in your house. You could, but then that's not equitable and that's not fair. You know, stuff matters. So the makeup of a neighborhood, the fairness of a neighborhood, you know, and you start talking about real estate policies, not all in a certain neighborhood, a certain demographic a certain way, and that makes others feel not as welcome in this nature. So it's a case for this intricate interrelationality, and it all matters and all works back to our clinics, because what we're doing in our clinics with our clients is promoting behavior change. You know, going for the why, the how, and the what is used to be active in this way and in creative ways and in ways to speak to you. And if options are limited for certain people in a way they're not for other people, you know, something's not right here. There's work to be done. So that's why it matters. That's why environment matters. That's why the system matters. That's why the terrain matters.
Yep, definitely. Couldn't agree with you more. I think, you know, and what you're doing in your clinics to community clinic to me is so powerful, because you may say you're not familiar with the socioecological approach, Efosa, but you live it, I think, in the work that you do, because you are interfacing at the policy level, you are interfacing at the community level, you are developing relationships and not just changing behavior of the individual clients that come through your clinic, but also working within your communities, within your cities where you have your clinics, to make sure that whatever you're teaching and promoting in your clinic with your individual clients is sustainable for them to do in their communities and environments, right? And so that's why I think some of the programs that Move Together has and the clinics you've built are successful, is because you have taken that lens of not just looking at what's going on in the clinic with the clinicians and the patients, but in your communities. So you're living it.
Well, thanks for those words, and learning alongside you and with you as well. And it speaks to all of us in any sort of engagement that we're thinking about things at the community level. And I want that to take us to the transition. This beautiful word and concept, the socio-ecological system approach. Like, what is it? How is it? Why is it? If somebody were to ask you, Rupal, and then let's dive in from there.
Yeah, right. So, it's, yeah, I get asked that a lot, because obviously, and if any of my students, former students like Kimberly that are on there, they know that that's something that, it helped me flip the switch again when I was in my PhD studies, in terms of thinking about, what we do as therapists, not just from that micro level, but all levels. And so, the socioecological, I think, approach or model, it takes into consideration things that the individual and their affiliations to people in their family, in their work settings. It takes into consideration organizations that they belong to and the community at large that they're part of, So we can't just look at the person just from the intrapersonal level, but also look at them from the interpersonal and the community, organization, and societal level. And so those are the different levels, individual, interpersonal, organizational, community, and public policy. And so at the individual level, we as physical therapists were, concerned about building the person's knowledge, their skills, their self-efficacy, maybe their, changing their attitudes, their behaviors. And so that's all good. And if I get that right with my patient, that's wonderful. But then they're going to have to go and interact with their family. And now, you're asking them, okay, walk 30 minutes a day. It's good for your health. Get those 10,000 steps. And they go home and, the family environment is not conducive to that, because they have to do other chores or tasks, or the family's not supportive. They want them to do other things, or is a barrier. Okay. It could be at the organizational level, the work site they're at. Maybe they're not allowed to take breaks and go for a 5-minute walk. Maybe there's not space to do that. And especially in this pandemic, everybody's kind of closeted in, so to speak. And so organizationally, what can be done? At the community level, safety, neighborhood, parks, things you've already talked about. And then at the policy level, and it's not just policy in terms of legislative, but it's also policy in terms of what's the policy for a particular organization or a school district, or a school. And so a good example of how we can work at that macro level is I was on the school health committee for the middle school that I'm zoned to while my daughter was in middle school at that time. And so, one of the things is we wanted kids to move more, and they got to school 45 minutes to an hour early. And because we have a large school, and you walk in and you go straight to the cafeteria and you sit, and you're basically packed in. So, the first kids pack this table, then the next table, the next table. So you don't even have a choice who you sit with, because they're just trying to pack you all in. And then all the kids are on their devices, and that's where they are until the bell rings and they go to first period. And so, that's not really healthy for the kids. And so can we do some movement related things? And so, we wanted the kids to be able to walk just inside the gym. Outside was not possible. You need, proctors, all this stuff. But it took several renditions of our committee working with the administrators, the teachers, to kind of figure out what would be a good way for us to promote movement, but also make it safe, also make it so that it's not extra burden on the teachers, and that fights don't break out or things don't happen and things like that. So that was a policy change that our committee worked through to allow kids on Fridays to walk the gym with music playing, and they could be, if they're walking, they can change the music, and of course that's to be clean and all that, but that's something like, just serving on that committee and working with parents and teachers and others, administrators, to kind of add a little bit more movement to the kids' day. And they're still doing that program, and it's been several years, where they do it just Fridays. They don't have the capacity to do that every day, So to me, that's working at the outer edge of the socio-ecological model, and just an example of how that can happen, policy within one school, that you can impact.
Well, but let's stay on that thread. I don't know if this is going to turn into a call to action, so to speak. Many physios and physical therapists and rehab clinicians, we feel very good and safe and well within the clinic walls. What we do, or exercise, manual therapy, education, whatever we're doing, and we feel content that we're doing a lot of good there, and much good is done there. Is that enough? Is there a play to go beyond? If we're talking about the social ecological approach and model and actually effectuating change that scales up into different levels, is there a play to engage on more than the level of the individual/clinic and think about going beyond the clinic walls? And what might that look like today and tomorrow? Sometimes we have these conversations, and these things seem policy and high and far away and up the mountain. How right now may a clinician, a young clinician, experienced clinician, maybe a student PT, anybody really, a person, engage in some of these neighborhoods in their community?
Yeah, so I think volunteering for school health advisory committees are called SACS, SHACS, in most school districts, and in middle schools they welcome parents, and it's not just parents, it's community members. So as a physical therapist in that community, you can volunteer for something like that to kind of and then work with parents and administrators and teachers, and usually the school health nurse, to look at that. So that's one way that you can engage. In some neighborhoods and schools, there's not good after school programs, and there's in those neighborhoods, parents can't afford to send their kids to after school. And so there's opportunities for maybe therapists to open up their clinic, for after school, some sort of an hour or two of movement, whatnot, or to take yourself or somebody from your clinic to a school or another location to provide some movement kind of activity kind of things, and those kind of things. And last year, one of our groups in health promotion, the community health promotion class that we do, and my colleague, Dr. Brewer, he facilitated that group. We worked with a charter school, and the students and the faculty member kind of went into this charter school, their after school program, which again, there was a lot of sitting and homework doing and snack, but and there was place to play, but there was issues with not enough staffing and safety and the kids running around. And so the students worked together, assessed kind of the needs, and kind of developed some recommendations for the after school program teachers to implement, that were more movement related, exercise related, that were fun and age appropriate. And those are the type of things that the teachers that were running the after school program didn't have time for, or the resources or maybe the know-how, but we could go in and kind of provide that blueprint that they can use. So, I mean, those are just, some examples of and I could go on forever, and I know we don't have time to do that, but,
Oh, I love that. I love those some right away things. In an earlier previous conversation we had, we talked about even looking to the parks in your neighborhood, how they set up. Are they set up in a way that are accessible to all types of folks?
Yep.
You're considering your social networks, your running groups, your family. The environment that is their system, the environment that they're moving. too, and where are people going? You said something wonderful in an earlier conversation. Bringing movement to where people are. You know,
Yeah.
if people of a group, let's say, are
Yeah.
going to the
Yeah.
temple park or this get together, you know, go to where they are, move to where they are, bring movement to where they are, and that might also be a way to effectuate change that is scalable. And what I love about movement, and Dr. Patel, we talked about this in earlier conversations, and this is fascinating. This is concretizing a bit more in my mind recently. Is the malleability of it? Is the malleability of it that it can conform to different groups? It's the hike up the mountain, it's the Boston Marathon, is the dance class, is Tai Chi, you know, different groups in different ways in different places is this multi-dimensional thing. And it moves, you know, is that nature. And in our role as rehab clinicians, this profession of physical therapy and wellness practitioners,
Mhm.
it's a call to action. I would say not just the clinic alone, to the point that you're making. Where can we where can we take it? How can we take it there? Starting tomorrow.
Yeah. So I think that's where the social determinants of health and that definition of, health happens where people are born, where they live, where they go to school, where they work, where they play, where they pray. And so go where the people are. As physical therapists, if our thing is to transform society, we have to, like you said, get out of our clinic walls and go into society, into those realms and spaces and places where people are moving, and if we meet them there, then we're more likely to have buy-in. They see that we're coming in and truly wanting to change what's going on in their society and their community, and so we're working as partners with them to affect change, and I think that's very powerful to do. Part of my dissertation, I conducted a lifestyle modification program in a Hindu temple, and so working with, going and doing the program at the temple on Sunday before services, so it's convenient and it's available to them, and so that they're more likely to come, infusing the lifestyle modification, which is based on the diabetes prevention program trials, but infusing everything I did, keeping in mind the culture, the religion, the practices, the barriers to movement that the literature showed in the South Asian population, keeping all that in mind and tailoring the program to that population, making sure that they have their own social support to do movement. And are there things in that community that at the temple itself, which is several acres of land, that we can set up opportunities for them to move together, and so as they're praying and doing circles around the temple, measuring out the distance so that, okay, if you want to walk 2.5 miles, 10,000 steps, it's this many laps around the temple. So making it convenient and easy and that kind of stuff. So lots of things where we can go to where the people are, where they pray, play, live, work, all those things.
Yes, I love it. I love that all so much. And then two thoughts here. One, recap on that and stitch some thoughts together. Our role as rehab clinicians, let's own this, guys. It's bi-directional. So people are coming to us in oftentimes vulnerability, pain, place of pain, but possibility, I always like to say. But many people come to us, and that's a lot of our day. But then is there a play and space? I think so, to go to them, to all that you just said. Bring whatever it is that is good in our craft to places, especially if people, there's barriers to access, and one of that is awareness, whether they don't know that clinicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, other rehab professionals might be able to help them live a more mobile life and thus a more maximized life. So that's one. And then in this space, when we're looking to effectuate positive change, to tread this realm with responsibility as well. Oftentimes people like to fit a problem to a preset solution or way to help. And that could be one, ineffective, which on that front is a waste of resources at its best. On the other end of the spectrum, can sometimes be harmful if not careful. So you do need to assess, before you lean in. So Dr. Tell, what are some of where can folks find assessment tools, and awareness tools and as they're getting into the space, and there's different levels of what this space is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, you know, if you look at just the CDC and the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention, the IOM, you know, in terms of health equity, looking at community-based needs assessment, there's a lot there. I think one of my favorite tools that I have my students use as part of their health promotion, community health promotion, is kind of a windshield survey is what it's called, which basically means get in your car and drive the area around the population that you're going to be working with. And it's a form, and it helps you check off all the things you should notice, you know, in that community in terms of lighting and parks and safety and bus stops and, you know, housing units, and you have multi-family versus single family. Do you have grocery stores? Are there food deserts? So like taking into account all those aspects of community as part of your needs assessment before you start assuming things or just come in with, well, I think you need to fix this or do this. Like take stock of what's around them and the place they live, work, pray, play in, and then base kind of, you know, what you're going to be doing based on that. So I think a single tool that any, you know, therapist can use is something like that. And I can send you a link to that so you can, you know, have it shared. But that's a very quick and easy, just, you know, driving around the area. If it's a patient that comes to you from an area you're not familiar with, I mean, now we have Google satellite and all that stuff. You can punch in the address and kind of get a landscape of where they're living, what their living environment with their home and parks and rec and safety and lighting and streets and sidewalks are like before you give them a home program that is going to tell them to go walk outside on the sidewalk and there are no sidewalks, you know.
I love that. I love that. That's something that we all could do. I don't know, there may be some minor limitations here and there, but for the most part, we all could do. The community that we're serving, get to know the community, take it in, breathe it, wander in, see its makeup. You know, the body of the community is just as much we're assessing and working on the body of our client. I love that. That's legitimately something that we all can do and should do in the communities that we in. Dr. Patel, as we wind down here, I want to give you the baton. Any direction that you want to guide folks to lean into, to read up on, to explore in extension within and from this conversation?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I think we've unpacked a lot already. I don't know if I can pick any one thing. I think that through this pandemic especially, I think the biggest lesson for me is to slow down maybe a little bit and really appreciate the opportunities you have to move. You know, I'm blessed to live in a neighborhood where it's a lake and there's a nice walking trail. But before this pandemic, you know, life was just too busy, and it was that planned exercise or activity that you did because you had to do. But because of the pandemic and the fact that can't really go anywhere else besides my neighborhood, have really, you know, I think you caught me last night with my husband walking to do that, you know, and to like take opportunity and to go at sunset and really admire that, oh my God, this is a beautiful sunset today. And, you know, I'm thankful and grateful that I can move and be able to enjoy this. And, you know, and I think in this pandemic, knowing that we don't know what's coming sometimes, and there's a lot of uncertainty, you know, being able to just enjoy being in the moment and moving, you know, and taking that opportunity would be something I would encourage everyone to do, you know, out there.
I love that so much. Thanks for sharing that. And I'll end on a poetic note to piggyback on what you just said, a bit of a poetic note, that whole idea of sunrises and sunsets. I love that as well. You know, whenever I see a sunrise coming up, I always, at least my heart thinks this happens, I always hear this whisper saying, the day has begun, do with it as you will. Mm-hmm. With sunset, as it goes behind the horizon, saying, okay, good night until we meet again. You know, so hopefully we're all parking time and creating time actually for more moments of stillness, just to see the sunrise and the sunset and the moon as it goes through its different variations. Those are the things that it's all about. So
I love that. That's beautiful. definitely meaningful. And you know, I've enjoyed this talk, and I also am a daughter of the Mahatma Gandhi as an Asian Indian immigrant. And, you know, when I was thinking about this conversation that was going to come up, and especially in the context of equity, there's a quote by Gandhi, which is not very well known, that the Mahatma said, and it said, "Every good movement passes through 5 stages: indifference, ridicule, abuse, repression, and then finally respect." And, you know, when we talk about movement, social dynamics and that movement, and movement just of our body, of our communities, you know, the Mahatma is always the great one. And so, you know, every good movement passes through 5 stages: indifference, ridicule, abuse, repression, and respect. So in terms of what's going on in our society and the movement that we're experiencing, where are we individually in terms of those stages? Where are we in our community? Where are we as a country? And then in terms of movement, the physical movement and the stages you go through personally, and where are you with your own movement? You know, are you indifferent? Is it ridicule? Are you abusing yourself or others to do it, not do it, repressing it, or are you respecting it and taking the opportunity to move?
Wow, well, that closes us down there. Dr. Patel, Rupal, is so great sharing time with you on this conversation tonight. Everybody that joined in, that's watching this live, and all those who may catch us later on, thank you so much. Like we said, this is an exploration. You know, we're humble in our approach and aspirational in our aim. You know, that's the way we can just move things forward, and forward towards what? Towards a more equitable world for everybody.
And everybody, don't forget, PT Day of Service is coming up, and you know, thinking about movement and what you can do to promote movement, especially in this pandemic world, and being creative with that in the communities where you're serving, I think would be awesome. And I know Move Together has a pro bono incubator program. I've had the honor of being a mentor in terms of grantees. And so I think that would be awesome, and for people to really consider taking what we have talked about today and some of the concepts, and how can you convert that into perhaps a PT Day of Service event.
Well said, well said. And you can visit that website or ptdayofservice.com. Let's keep the journey going, everybody. Thank you so much. Till next time.
All right, thank you.